First of all, thanks so much to Paweł and Piotrek for inviting me over. I mean, it's been long overdue. I'm super excited to be here. First of all, my name is Paweł, as you probably already guessed. I may not look like it, but I'm 20 years in the business, over 20 years actually, being a professional developer, more than 10 of which I dedicated to mobile applications engineering, mostly iOS, but I also had some experience with cross-platform engineering and Android as well. I know, don't judge me. We all make mistakes, right? I work at White Hat Gaming, which essentially is a platform that allows to deploy online casinos, and privately I run my own blog dedicated to best practices in software engineering, especially concentrating on mobile and iOS in particular. And today I would like to tell you a few words about this approach to software engineering called software craftsmanship. And because it's a very serious subject, I'll be using only serious and handfully selected learning materials, namely memes. So today I have only 3 topics for you. So first I would like to compare 2 approaches to our daily work, namely how to be a software craftsman versus a factory worker kind of developer. Then we're going to talk about quality, the cost of quality, and cost of lack of quality. And finally, discuss how software craftsmen choose their assignments, their projects, what they look for in those projects. So I hope then we'll have some time for quick summary and questions. So without further ado, let's just do it. So if you ask me about one word that can define a craftsman the best, I would say it's responsibility. And not only responsibility from skills and education, and newsflash, you probably know that, but our employers are not really responsible for our education. We are, right, as we should be. Not only about the project success, our career in general, sharing knowledge, or driving the change if that's needed. Well, you may be thinking that's a lot of responsibilities, right? But as we all know, responsibilities are a vital part of life, and we can still enjoy our lives to the fullest while being responsible. You only need to know to wake up early in the morning. Jokes aside, that approach, when we embrace that responsibility, kind of drives us into a specific approach to doing our job as software engineers, and this is that we tend to kind of be there to solve clients' problems and not necessarily to be told how to do that, right? And you may think, for reference, of other highly specialized professionals like architects, for instance, financial advisors, lawyers, and a doctor, for instance, right? You wouldn't go to a doctor and tell them how to treat you, would you? I mean, I hope you don't. Some people do. Nevertheless, we kind of do our research, right? We find the right person, and then we just go to them and trust them to do their job, right? To diagnose us, to order proper tests, and then present a treatment plan, right? However, when it comes to our profession, I think you can all agree that sometimes we allow the clients to tell us how to do our job. And when we do, we slowly transition dangerously into the approach characterized as a factory worker developer. So if you think of a typical factory worker, what are they responsible for? Only to do what they're told, to show up in the factory on time, punch a clock card, just do what they're told for 8 hours straight or however long is their shift, and then punch the time card back and just go home, right? They don't really care if the project succeeds or not, right? Who cares, really? They don't really care about learning new things. It sounds like a tough work, right? Why do it? If they have any specific knowledge, they tend to keep it to themselves because that makes them indispensable, because the top priority for a factory worker would always be to have a stable job. In a contrast, we have a craftsman. And craftsmen, as we already established, don't mind a bit of responsibility, right? Especially for a product success. And to do that, they need to basically own the technical stack. But not only that, they also want to have an impact on business decision. Of course, they won't dictate the business with features to include, but rather, have some impact that allows them to basically kind of level out the keeping adding of the value to the product and maintaining technical debt, that kind of stuff. And that leads us to this approach that they're interested in solving things, not just pushing tickets, across the Jira. They tend to share knowledge openly, without any problem, right? There's been so many magnificent speakers throughout the history of Mobile Warsaw, right? They all didn't mind sharing their knowledge, because the priority of a craftsman will always be becoming better, right? Learning every day. So at this moment, you might be scratching your head and thinking, well, that's not exactly for me. It almost sounds like a quote-unquote hero, right? Kind of a white knight that swoops in to save a badly managed project at the cost of countless overtime and their personal lives, right? We know that kind of people. The corporations wouldn't exist without them, right? And you couldn't be more wrong if you think this way, because craftsmen would never be a hero. They will never sacrifice their drive for knowledge. They never sacrifice their core beliefs, their private time with their family, to save, quote-unquote, save some kind of badly managed project. No matter how nicely they're asked by the management, they just won't do that. And to help you illustrate that a bit better, I'll tell you my own story, but I think you'll be able to resonate with that story because it's very universal. So, actually, it happened to me, let's say, 15 years ago, maybe. I don't really exactly remember when, but I was working for an educational company, and we were doing application to basically visualize different language courses for people, right? And we had a client that asked for some alterations, and in the middle of that development, they changed that requirement, which was frankly normal. We re-estimated, we kind of reached out to them, they accepted that delayed release, and we just went back to work, just business as usual. And on one Friday, because all the good things happen in software engineering on Fridays, right? Our project manager just came to us. She was visibly upset, almost teary, saying, guys, client just went mad. You need to, they just threatened to sue the company. Basically, if you want help, the company will get in debt. They have to let some people go. Please, can you stay a couple of hours during the weekend, to save the company? Only you can do it. And because we were young and stupid, of course, we said yes, right? Because obviously nobody wanted that responsibility. This entire company, like 300 people, is going bankrupt, right? So of course, as you can imagine right now, it wasn't just a couple of hours. It was close to 30, I think. Entire weekend basically spent coding, right? But we managed to do that. We managed to complete that release. And I think we've sent it early morning on Monday and just totally went to sleep. When we arrived at the office, basically, on Monday afternoon, we expected a hero's welcome, right? Because we just saved the company, right? And guess what happened? Absolutely nothing. Nobody knew we just saved the company, right? Nobody knew we were even working during the weekend. And most of all, the client didn't know either. And the client didn't know because they didn't really want that extra release, as it turned out. It didn't have anything to do with the client. And if anything, they expected that release to be done on that, postponed date, not the previous one. So they had to actually rearrange some of the QAs, which was more of a problem to them. So we reached out, confused, to that project manager, and it turned out that unfortunately she wasn't available anymore because she was half across the globe on her vacations, right? And as you can imagine, it had nothing to do with the client. The client didn't want that expedited release. Only she needed to basically show perfect score in terms of release deadlines, meeting release deadlines for her promotion. Well, that being said, I think you can all relate to that kind of story, so please, a bit of advice. Don't try to be a hero, maybe unless you want to be a named employee of the month, right? But in all seriousness, however, don't try to be a hero, because in the end, the only people remembering your overtime would probably be your spouse and your children, right? Definitely not the company you work for. To make it more explicit, maybe, try learning saying no as soon as possible. And by saying no, I mean hard no. So whenever you are kind of asked to do impossible, to meet some unrealistic deadlines, just say no outright. Don't say, I will try, or I'll do my best, because the business will probably hear what they wanted to hear, right? And then he'll be held accountable. Just say no, and even better, if you can follow this up with some alternatives, right? Say, okay, this is what you're asking me to do, it's impossible. However, there are options 1, 2, and 3 you can choose from that's doable in that timeline. Next, if by some miracle you want to crunch, do some overtime, do it only to add extra value to your release. So you just complete the sprint, you have a killer feature in mind, and you're determined to release it as soon as possible. Yeah, that's the only acceptable crunch, if there is something like acceptable crunch. But honestly, if you're doing overtime just to close the sprint, then you're just perpetuating pathology, right? Unfortunately, if the velocity is wrongly calculated, then trying to ease it up with adding additional work hours is like trying to extinguish a fire with gasoline. Also, equally important, which I really liked doing back in the office days, we're going to the offices, is to match management expectations for engagement. By that, I mean, whenever I was asked to save a company, I always asked, okay, so if it's that important, I understand that you will be staying with me in the office throughout all the time. I'll be implementing that feature, right? And magically, you couldn't possibly imagine their answer. They always had some kind of excuses, right? Always had some urgent errands to run, children to take from kindergarten, whatever, right? In-laws visiting during the weekend. So at this moment, I knew that it's not a serious deadline, right? Because you see, jokes aside, there are two kinds of deadlines in our business. Hard deadlines that are, quite frankly, motivated or influenced by external events, like there is a conference happening the same or roughly the same time every year, right? Or there is a big marketing campaign that has to be basically started at one day, right? So there is no much wiggle room, right, to move that deadline, is there? However, the remaining deadlines are so-called soft deadlines. And they exist only because somebody put that date in a spreadsheet, right? Unfortunately, IT is Excel-driven business. Most of the deadlines exist only because somebody put the date there, right? And the only inconvenience for such a manager would be to go to that spreadsheet and change that date to allow you more time. So, soft deadlines, right? So, mostly exist because they're put in a spreadsheet, right? And the only inconvenience for such a manager would be to go either to their superior or directly to a spreadsheet and change the date. And of course, it might cost them a promotion or some brownie points, but I think as we all are here, we can all agree it's a sacrifice we're more than willing to make. Okay, that leads us to, I think, interesting question. I mean, I guess some of you might be thinking, who am I, right? Am I more of a craftsman, more of a factory worker? How to distinguish between the two? And I would say we are probably a bit of both at the same time. You're probably familiar with this legend of two wolves, right? That we have two wolves fighting constantly inside of us, right? Each representing different element like chaos and order and so on and so forth, right? So it's a bit like that with craftsmanship and being a factory worker. You can't be perfect craftsman all the time. It's just simply impossible. But you contribute, you feed one of the wolves with every decision you make during your professional time. And in the end, it's always important that you feed the right wolf most of the time. That wolf will probably thrive. So how does it all relate to our daily work? There are two things actually I would like to take away from that part. First, try to agree with the client on some kind of a scheduled releases. By that I mean, ideal release should be an effect, a result of a successful sprint, is properly tested, and the whole team could basically sign under such a release. Because if you teach your client that it's okay just to call you in the middle of the night, it doesn't even have to be that dramatic, but let's say just call you at any given moment and just ask to release the application and you agree, then you're dead. I mean, it's that simple. Next, it's also worth establishing or creating that relationship with your client, just almost a business-like, so that they trust you as a highly qualified specialist to do your job and to choose tools to do that job properly. Okay, that part done. Let's talk about quality. So I bet you heard this question millions of times. How much is it going to cost me to implement that unit test or to do that refactoring, right? I just love those kinds of questions from the business. But I think fundamentally this is the wrong kind of question. The question instead they should be asking is, what's the cost of not having quality or decent quality in your code base? And I think we can try to answer that question right now. So I think the primary cost would be that if the code base is deteriorating, the business becomes a hostage to that code base. What I mean by that is that the more difficult it is to introduce the change, the slower it gets, the less opportunities for feedback the business would have. So it means that in the end you can end up implementing a feature for like 6 months, fighting technical debt, fighting regression, and so on and so forth, just to find out that the users don't really want it, right? And just, waste a lot of money. On top of that, quality will always be expected of you. I mean, almost always. Let me come to that in just a second. If you want a real-life example, think of trying to fix your car in a hurry, right? Let's say you want to go on a road trip, right? On a Friday, you've left your car with the car mechanic to just do a basic checkup because you want to be safe on the road. Okay, cool. And then they call you and say, look, there might be a problem, I need to fix your brakes, and the parts are not there, so it could be tight. So what do you say? Of course you say, screw it, just use duct tape, zip ties, hammer it. I don't care if I crash on the nearest tree, right? That's what you say. Of course not. Of course not. You still, despite you're in a hurry, you still want your car to be safe, right? And every reasonable mechanic with an ounce of dignity, and there are some mechanics like that, they're just dying breed, but they they won't release the car to you if it's dangerous, right? If it's a danger, if it could cause you hurt, right? And unfortunately, we are sometimes guilty of allowing the client to release the application. That's not very good, right? And yeah, on top of that, you may be asking, are there projects that don't really need quality? And in fact, there are. And there are only 3 kinds of projects like that, at least from my experience. Maybe you have other examples as well. Number 1, of course, proof of concept. Just simple applications that's going to prove or disprove some kind of a business concept, right? Cool. Obviously, you don't really have to care about the quality unless this proof of concept is to be merged directly into the production branch, which sometimes they do end up in the production branch. Next, we have corporate R&Ds, and especially big corporations, they had some kind of R&D budget they want to burn. Then sometimes they create such a projects that, from the inception, basically, they're not expected to be actually deployed to production. They just expect you, if you are in such a project, to prepare a nice looking application, to do a nice presentation for all bells and whistles for the board members of the board, right? And then the project is scrapped, right? In such case, you're also forgiven for not thinking about quality. And the last category are scams. Just applications that exist only for, just crooks to get money from gullible investors, showing unrealistic speed of software of development, right? And if you're one such project, I hope you aren't. I'm sure you aren't. But if you do, then you should rethink your life choices. But anyway, you also can be forgiven not to think about quality when the project will be scrapped in 3 months, right? But in all other cases, I can guarantee, no matter what the client says, they'll always expect you to deliver quality work. Okay, and because of that, you need to find a way to make sure that the code you produce won't end up legacy the moment you hit the merge button. And the cheapest way to do it is to make sure you have some kind of automated tests that go with that code. And the cheapest automated tests are, of course, unit tests, right? So that needs to be a definition of done, part of a definition of done. Next, if you want to experiment, there are lots of different experimental branches you can create to showcase, test different proof of concept, right? Makes perfect sense up until the point where that code is to be merged to a production branch, because when it happens, it needs to conform to the quality of the production code, right? That, as we all know, sometimes it doesn't happen. And lastly, it always surprises me how team core values are reflected in the daily practices of that team. What I mean by that, if you have a team that is all for open communication, about quality, about maintaining proper code base, then it's all reflected in what they do every day. They have an open and respectful code review process, up to some point also automated, most likely. They'll probably have open communication with the client, they'll own their mistakes, and so on and so forth. If they don't share that values, then they won't. Simple as that. They won't have such a practice in their arsenal. But up to this point, I think we spoke about financial results of not maintaining proper quality in our code bases, but that's not the worst of it. Also, it's just the tip of the iceberg, right? The more profound consequences are the ones that affect the team and the organization on, let's say, mental level. And the first thing that happens if the project is no longer taking any care of the quality is that the best people just leave, because they won't spend their time arguing with the business and so on. So just look for another job. Those who stay will develop that, I just work here, it's fine, I still develop, add value to just do what the client wants of me, I still add value to the project. And that results in low empowerment, because even if people feel like something should happen, right, something should be changed, well, they still don't feel like they can do it. And that leads to not being able to innovate at the proper rate. So, basically sticking to the same frameworks for like 5 years, right? I've seen that happen, unfortunately, many times. And that culminates in something I called zero passion environment, where you just come to work, punch your clock card, do what you're told, but your manager is replaced by Jira in most cases, right? Then you punch your clock card back and just go home, and that 5 days a week. Not very enticing prospect, at least for me. And also, there might be, I would say, an argument against developing a proper quality in your code base, that it doesn't allow you to deploy value as fast as you would if you disregard certain aspects of quality. And I totally agree. If you keep every single line covered with tests, conformant to S.O.L.I.D or whatever, right, it will probably slow you down. It will more likely slow you down. However, there's one caveat in that. Lines of code, unlike people, are not born equal, right? There are more important lines of code and less important lines of code. And if you invest in knowing your client and understanding their business processes, how they make money in short, you can quite easily isolate that most important 20% of the code. Because I know if you heard of it, probably you heard of it. There is this Pareto principle, also called 20-80 rule, where basically 20% of effort result in 80% of the outcome. Like 20% of factories produce 80% of goods, and so on and so forth. The same applies to our code. And if you locate that 20% of the most important code and make it snappy, make it perfect, then I would argue you won't have most of the problems with your clients. Because if there is an issue and it happens in that less protected 80% of the code, less important 80% of the code, well, probably you'll be fine, right? Because then it's very unlikely clients are going to lose money on it. But if it happens in that 20% of the most important code, well, you might feel like you are not up for a good day, right? If that happens. In worst case scenario, the client's just gonna lose money, right? And the best case scenario, they just ain't gonna make money, but still they're gonna be angry with you. And for that, at least for that 20% of the code, I would never negotiate on quality. I would negotiate on time or on finances, right? So if the client wants something faster, it's gonna cost more, as simple as that. If they don't have enough money, they're gonna have to wait longer. But don't negotiate on quality. In regards to 20% of the most important part of the code. So that brings us to the most important question, the question for the ages. How can I ask my manager to graciously allow me to do my job the right way, right? To allow me to use good practices, right? How can I tell? How can I ask that question? Well, you don't. I mean, seriously. You are the talent, right? You're the handful of the most talented people. Only a select few that can do this job, right? In terms of the skill set, of the level where you are no different than a very good doctor, very good architect, very good investment banker, right? And you really don't have to ask for permission to do your job the right way. So please, don't, okay? Just don't. But what you can do is when you're working with your teams, try establishing something called development standard. I mean, it sounds serious, but it's really not. It's nothing more than just gentleman agreement. That you are with your team and just discussing, okay, what's the good enough definition of certain things like code quality, like communication, and so on and so forth. Once you have this established and it's agreed across the team, just make it a standard, right? Make it enforced across all the levels, wherever you can, and even better if you can make it automated. Especially for code review, especially for quality standards, we have excellent tools, formatters, linters, static code analysis, merge blockers, you name it. Most of the stuff can be basically done almost fully automated. And at the end, remember that only measured things can improve. It always surprises me when I join the project that is struggling to, let's say, increase, let's say, code coverage or generally the quality of the code. And all I need to do is to hook up danger with just annotating the pull request with what's the code coverage for the chunk of code that's been changed in that pull request, right? With just a bit of warnings from linter and suite formatter, and that's it. Because it's much more difficult to submit a pull request for review that is unfortunately full of newly added warnings, not tested code, and so on. Whereas if it's counted, it's measured, it's again much more difficult, and suddenly from that point in history, the quality just skyrockets, right? It just goes only up. So, yeah, that brings us to the last part of my little talk. It's how software craftsmen in general, but I think basically every software developer should select their next assignments. And these are mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So what is mastery? I probably sound like a success coach right now, but it's essentially an ability to become better every day. And it's not only in relation to technical skills, but also all other skills that contribute to project success. And it could be anything from good communication, leadership, explaining things to business, pitching ideas to business, all kinds of stuff, teaching in general, presentation, all the things that can contribute into just allowing you to do a better job. And critical part of it is being able to ask and act on feedback. So again, I would very much like your feedback on my presentation. If there are things you didn't like, if there are things you didn't agree with me, what did you remember from our presentation, how I can make it better, right, in general. But it's if you want to ask me about the quickest way to improve, it's to learn that habit of asking for feedback. Also, it might be enticing to start comparing yourself to others. I wouldn't really do that because we all walk different walks of life. We all kind of have different strengths and weaknesses. The only person you should be comparing yourself to is actually yourself just 6 months into the past, right? Just to see how much have you improved. But don't just do that with others. And finally, something that was a bit of a game changer for me, I wish I could have learned that faster, is an ability to turn my targets, my goals, into the series of manageable habits. So let's say you want to learn TCA, let's say, in month, right? This is a typical goal, like a good old success coach could teach you, right? Set up a clear goal with clear deadline and so on, right? And it is a good goal, right? It's definitely worth considering. However, it may sound daunting, especially if you haven't tried any Redo or Redux-based architectures before. It might be a bit daunting, right? But if you turn it into, let's say, spending 10 minutes a day, just listening to the Point 3 guys, right, their podcasts, or reading through their blogs, and another 20 minutes experimenting on the code in your pet project, I can wager that in no time you'll know how to do it, right? And it just goes with everything. You can split into manageable habits. Okay, that's mastery. Autonomy, essentially, it's being captain of your own ship, right? Taking that ownership of a technical stack, freedom to choose the tools you think are best for the job, and developing that partnership with your client, right? I mean, pretty straightforward. What about purpose then? Essentially, I define purpose as being part of something more than just doing another application, right? It could be, for instance, that it's an application that may literally change lives, right? And just to give you an example, I once were very close to lead a team to develop a banking application that was to empower and basically bank women in Saudi Arabia for the first time in history. Because up until that point, each time they wanted to actually interact with the banking, they had to go to their husband, get like this written agreement, and then without that, no bankers wanted to talk to them. And unfortunately, that project didn't come to pass. The investor just pulled out at the last moment. But if you have that kind of a goal, right, that literally could touch thousands of people and change their lives, that works wonders for your motivation. Also, maybe you have a private mission, right? For instance, you are all for educating on financial wellness, right? Financial awareness, right? Or educate on good practices in software engineering. And your project helps you do that. Well, that also can work wonders for your motivation. But alas, it's not necessary. I mean, I personally knew a lot of great developers that just work in, let's say, basic applications, right? And it's just fine, as long as they have mastery and autonomy in that applications. So at this moment, you might be scratching your heads, thinking, those projects don't really exist. At least I don't know any projects like that allows you all of that, to choose your tech stack, to be motivated all the time, right? It just doesn't work this way. And you're probably right. But then you can try to elevate that the current project you're working on, or at least try. So to do that, you're gonna have to drive the change. And change is actually a tricky subject, because our brains evolve in a way that kind of treat change like a necessary evil, right? We are afraid of change, we go away from it because it costs a lot of energy. And our brains basically are all about saving energy. And to introduce any kind of change to a group of people, you're gonna have to keep them motivated, right? And the cheapest way to do it is to show them that through that change, they could learn something new, they could evolve, right? Improve themselves. But remember that every practice you're gonna instantiate in that project must be organic. But I mean, it has to be agreed with the team, it has to be something they understand, they feel comfortable with, because if you just scoop in as a good old tech lead or senior developer and say, from now on, 60% of the code needs to be tested. If you want pull requests to pass, then prepare to fight some resistance, right? Because that won't be organic. So how to do it practically? First rule of introducing change will be to be prepared. I mean, that's the thing, it goes without saying. You need to be skilled in what you're trying to teach. So you want to introduce BDD? Well, become an expert in BDD. You want to introduce TCA? Become a literate in TCA, right? Next, lead by example, right? Nobody's going to believe or want to follow a developer that doesn't put their wallet where their money is, right? Sorry, where their mouth is, right? You can't really drive the change unless you're at the top of it, right? Just implementing coding with the guys. Also, equally important, try to get to know your team. Know what they've been through, try to respect them, listen to them, because especially if you're just joining the organization and some things may seem weird or old-fashioned, but that worked for that team for a very long time. And if you want to change it, you need to understand why it worked for them for such a long time. Also, I think, again, it goes without saying, necessary to adjust your communication. You'll be talked differently to a junior, differently to, let's say, an architect or a senior developer, differently to business, right? And on that subject, as important as it is to be able to conduct those conversations in a specific manner, sometimes it's equally important to not to have certain conversations. And in that case, I would take a page of the book of this famous and very brave American general and choose your battles. Okay? We already described this situation, right? Where you don't really have to ask your boss for permission to do quality work, right? That's the exact example of such conversations that are not worth having, right? You have only limited amount of energy, focus spent every day, so spend it where it matters, right? Not waste it on discussions simply not worth having. Okay, so if you know the rules, you'll probably have to deal with somebody called skeptics, right? And these are essentially people who either openly or covertly will oppose the change, and quite frankly, you're gonna have to get them on your side, at least some of them, to actually implement that change effectively. So the first category are just the uninformed. Can you read that? Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. So basically, these are people who just don't know any better, right? Maybe they just joined the company right after graduating and nobody told them how to do things. And for them, I would just advise showing them the way, right? Showing them the way. So just, show them how to do things, and in most cases, they'll just come around, right? Next, we have the passive. These are people who feel like something is wrong. Maybe they know they should be doing things differently, but they don't feel empowered enough to actually drive the change themselves. And with them, I would advise taking responsibility. So take the driving wheel, say, look guys, let's do it. Let's take a look. Let's see how it goes. I take full responsibility. You won't be harmed. No worries, right? Next, we have cynicals. And there are people who are gonna, just oppose you for the sake of it. A little bit of trolls, right? And honestly, unless you can troll them back, which is a specific skill of its own, I tend to like it. I do it all the time, but it's just me, right? You may not feel confident to do that, which is just fine. And then I'll just advise to ignore them, right? They'll sway your way once the majority of the team, is actually implementing the change you want. Next, we have the burnouts, and that's really a sad story. There are people who were in your shoes sometimes back. They tried to drive the change, but they got burned by the corporate. Either they missed an important deadline or they lost the client, and now they just burned out. They just don't want to do it anymore. And for them, I would advise a mixture of taking the responsibility and showing them the way. So just show them how to do things right now in the current day and age, and just alleviate them from the responsibility. And they should be just fine, getting their hands wet again. Next, we have non-technical people. Obviously, again, you can probably guess what the answer would be. Yes, obviously, pick your battles, right? Invest your time where it's needed. You don't really have to explain a lot to the non-technical people, just show them the benefits, what you're doing, and that's it. Next, we have the rationals, and it's a specific category of people, probably the worst kind to deal with. They're just gonna argue with you without any apparent rhyme or reason. And honestly, especially for you can spend hours discussing, trying to rationalize with an rational, but it just doesn't work, right? Those kind of people, it's almost like wrestling a pig in a mud. After an hour or so, you may come to the conclusion that the pig just likes it. You, I guess not so much. And finally, we have out-of-the-touch architects. Basically, they used to be a plague, like 10 years ago. Fortunately, now it's no longer the case. I hope it's not, anyway. There are people who were promoted to a non-coding position, and still they retained all the options to basically impose different tech stacks or architectures on the development team without coding with them and without taking any actual responsibility for what they're doing, right? You probably know who I'm talking about, right? One day or another you met people like that. And with them, I would recommend making them responsible. So if they just scoop into your project, telling you to replace entire tech stack because they don't like it, I would advise just write an email to all the stakeholders informing that Mr. Architect told us to do this and that, to change the tech stack to such and such, because it's not the technology we anticipated. It's gonna result in additional 3 to 6 months of additional work to be included into the release. And if you have any questions, dear stakeholders, Mr. Architect will be more than welcome to probably answer your questions, right? And this simple trick allows you to point the responsibility where it belongs, right? The people who actually impose the changes. And in most cases, having to answer that responsibility, they'll just back down. And that leads us to the last and probably the hardest responsibility in terms of driving the change in your projects, which is knowing where to quit. And no matter how much you try, how hard you try, how many hours you spend, how many people you educate, how good of a developer you are, still there are some organizations, some projects, some people that don't want to be helped. And basically, at that moment, you have to just cut the losses, help people who basically deserve to be helped, and just move on. And those people who stay, they're just gonna get what they deserve. Simple as that. So, finally, how does it relate to what we daily do as software engineers? If you're seeking a project, seek those who offer full ownership and are led by passionate teams. How to find them, you might ask? And the answer would be just listen to the teams you're talking to, right? The interview is a two-way conversation. It's not like an interrogation, right? It should be a two-way conversation. You can also ask questions. So ask them about their processes, about the tech stacks, about their practices, all the stuff we discussed today, right? And you'll hear that in their voices, that they're proud, that they're really happy describing to you what they're doing. You can easily hear that. It's actually almost palpable in the air, right? Whereas if you participate in an interview with people who are not especially proud of what they're doing, you can also hear that in their voices. Next, if you're driving change, try concentrating on something small. Choose just a bunch of people, okay? Choose only select few of the features. Start small. You don't have to change entire organization in one go. Start small and then escalate from there. And remember, not anyone wants to be saved. Not anybody likes to be saved. Just work with people who really deserve your attention. Okay. So thank you so much for bearing with me up to this moment. Let me really quickly sum up and let's go to questions. So I think we are probably all aware or heard of the term agile hangover, right? That agile was basically sold to our communities as a silver bullet, basically solving all the problems with efficiency, with communication and so on. As we all can agree, I think it didn't actually work this way, not to the fullest, but you might be surprised that the craftsmanship doesn't actually neglect or dismiss agile, it actually builds on top of that, okay? So not only should we build working software, but also make sure it stands the test of time. Not only we should be able to respond to the change, but also make sure we add value constantly with every release. Not only should we concentrate on basically interactions, individuals, but also build a community of professionals, right? Like the one we are here right now. Not only, finally, should we look to have that collaboration with the customer, but also build this long-lasting partnership, right? And if there are 3 things I would like you to consider, ending this presentation, is that in terms of this conflict of mindsets between craftsman and factory worker, you can't be a perfect craftsman all the time. It's just fine. It all boils down to the choices we make every day. And if we elect to feed the right wolf, most of the time, we should be just fine. Next, quality will always be expected of you. I mean, unless you're in those 3 categories, you're working the projects that are in that 3 categories I just mentioned, the clients, no matter what they say, they always will be expecting quality outcome of you. And you never could go wrong producing quality outcome. And finally, when selecting your assignments, elect to be a captain of your ship, right? Elect to be a partner for the client and elect to become better every day. So if you want to take a closer look at the term, this topic of software craftsmanship, there's an excellent book from Sandro Mancuso. I couldn't recommend enough. He goes into much more details into basically the difference between agile and software craftsmanship, the career, all the stuff that I didn't have time to even broach during this talk. Also, there's an excellent conference talk by Sandro. Also, he goes to much more details in differences between Scrum and software craftsmanship. And finally, 2 of my blog posts, one about career of a software craftsman, how to guide your career. I'll also be very grateful if you can tell me what you think. But again, I didn't have time to even, it's been a very long presentation. I didn't have time to even talk about this very important topic. And also a blog post about quality. I go in much details in why the quality is so important. So that being said, that's enough I have for you today. Thank you so much for your kind attention. You've been great today. Let's have some questions and let's connect. Thank you so much. Okay, so the question was, whereas I can give an example from my own experience about leading such initiative. Well, actually, you can ask Krzysiek and Kuba, my mates from NetGuru, because we were in that organization at the practices. Actually, I'll introduce something called Good Practice Initiative, exactly like that in NetGuru, where I worked for more than 4 years. How to do it? Basically, exactly like I described. You start small. When we started, it was only, I think, 3 people. There were 3, I would say, regular developers that were very ambitious. So we started by, look, let's try it. Let's see how we can ensure you get promotion as soon as possible, right? Just add a little bit of, how to put it, a little bit of enticement for those people. We started basically writing articles, doing presentations to the community, basically on good practices, and then more and more people joined. And I think in its peak it was 20 people, something like that, 15 at least. So that was really, really nice. I really look at it fondly, from that perspective. One of the things I'm most proud at. If that answers your question, but essentially you just start small. You build people around you who can support you. Unfortunately, at the very beginning, it's a lot of work because you have to organize everything yourself, but then later, it's almost a self-perpetuating machine, right? People have their own ideas. I think Piotrek was also part of that for quite some time, right? He has excellent ideas about SwiftUI, which was just introduced, right? How we can marry SwiftUI with UIKit for our clients. Yeah, so then later people just come in and they're just perpetuating that train with their own ideas. Yeah, excellent question. So the question was, how do you proceed when you know you've made a mistake, right? You're choosing to introduce say, a new framework, and it turned out it wasn't a good decision. So the first thing I would say is to be honest. Just admit that you've made that mistake. But the sooner you can get it, the sooner you can actually know that you've made that mistake, the less it's going to hurt the client, right, and the business. So, like you probably remember, it's good to measure, right, the things you're trying to improve, right. So if you have even business-like measurements like velocity or quality of the releases, number of regressions, that kind of stuff, plus the technical stuff, and it is telling you that bundle of measurements is telling you that you're not going in the right direction, then just admit it. Say, okay, I've made a mistake, right? And of course, that's why you should start small with something, little, the secluded feature, right? That maybe it's not that important, because then it's all, basically you can treat it as science, right? Oh, you tried TCA and didn't work for you in that particular aspect, or you tried Viper in the old days, right? All people tried Viper and they got, it didn't work for them as they expected. So yeah, essentially start small and then escalate from there, right? Once you have a confirmation. And if it didn't work, it's also a good question to just to learn about your organization, right? If that's the organization that allows you to make mistakes, because quite frankly, if the thing doesn't work for you or didn't work for you at this given moment, it could still in the future, right? And it still could be a valuable lesson, right? The fact that you try Viper and it failed for you for a specific reason, you write a debrief, you make a specific conclusion from what you learned trying to implement Viper, for instance, and then, let's say, a year from there, another team tries to do it, and they don't want to experiment like you did. They just go on full on to Viper, and they could encounter the things your findings and say, well, let's not do that. Those guys already tried it and it didn't work too well. I would say that it wasn't a mistake, it was just a valuable lesson.
Thanks.
Thank you.